Hello again. Lecture for Fire and Emergency Services Instructor, Chapter 8, Skills-Based Training Beyond the Classroom. Learning objective number 1. We're going to discuss agencies and organizations where instructors can find the most current information about safety guidelines and regulations. Jumping into it. Regardless of the location of the class session, we as instructors must understand our responsibilities when teaching skills. The first responsibility is to maintain a safe training environment. Injuries, and especially fatalities, are unacceptable in training scenarios. The second responsibility is to teach skills with the student's mastery as the ultimate goal. Realistically, students may not reach mastery during one class, but may reach a level of competency necessary to satisfy the learning objectives. Our students' future safety and the safety of their classmates depends upon instructors who can teach them to perfect and maintain key skills. This chapter presents instructors with the basic information needed to safely teach skills, including resources. We're going to talk safety guidelines, regulations, information. We're going to talk instructors as a safety role model. We're going to talk planning for safe training. We're going to talk psychomotor skills demonstrations, evolution control, simple training evolutions, increased hazard exposure training, and the legal liability. So here we go. Numerous federal government agencies in North America are responsible for developing, regulating, and ensuring safe workplace policies. 4 based in the U.S. and Canada that may be of the greatest use to instructors are the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, also called NIOSH. You will hear about these folks a lot, especially when there's accidents. NIOSH reports are where we go to see the results of what happened. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. In Washington State, it's called WSHA. There's the Canadian one, and then the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is the NIST. Other organizations may have more specialized regulatory information that instructors may need to seek out for specific training situations. Like when we talk hazmat and we're using the emergency response guide from the DOT. Very specialized there. Continuing on safety guidelines, regulations, information, here's some more resources. We have the Department of Homeland Security, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, which I just brought up, and the Department of Defense. Here's a note. Agencies in both Canada and the U.S. share information and materials. Some Canadian safety regulations are based on or modeled after the NFPA standards and OSHA regulations. State and local safety and health agencies. State and local governmental occupational safety and health agencies often include review and enforcement functions. In Canada and the U.S., state or local agencies may have the following regulations that differ from, expand upon, or exceed national rules. This may also have to follow additional regulations not addressed at the federal level, such as those mandated by the state environmental agencies. In Washington State, instead of OSHA, which is federal, we have WSHA, which is state-run, and to have your own state safety and health agency, you have to exceed, meaning be more strict than the federal guidelines. So WSHA is more strict than OSHA. We as instructors need to know the federal, state, and local regulations that are likely to impact our training evolutions. When in doubt about regulations, Instructors should know how to contact their state and local government occupational safety and health agencies, state fire training academies, state fire marshal offices, or EMS agencies to inquire about which regulations may be applicable for a particular training evolution. We as instructors should not limit our inquiries to regulations for fire and emergency services. State and local agencies may also have safety regulations written for other industries or organizations that will apply to fire and emergency services training. For example, regulations for construction workers on a roof may be applicable to firefighters training for vertical ventilation scenarios. Fire and emergency services trench rescue operations may be governed by regulations for shoring and cribbing that apply to private contractors who lay underground cables and pipelines. Regulatory agencies may have consultants or educators who can review pertinent safety regulations with instructors who are planning a training curriculum or course. State and local health departments or agencies can also provide statistical data and safety programs, as well as information on disease and their prevention. Standards writing organizations develop and issue operating procedures and design requirements for various industries, including the fire and emergency services. These organizations arrange for a committee composed of industry representatives to build an overall standard as members develop a consensus on individual topics. These standards do not become law until a government authority adopts them. Remember that. The primary standards writing organizations involved in the fire service are the National Fire Protection Association, also known as the NFPA, the American National Standards Institute, known as ANSI, and Underwriters Laboratories Incorporated, known as UL. The International Association of Fire Chiefs, the IAFC, the International Association of Firefighters, that's the labor union for career firefighters. They do a lot of safety and health work. That is the IAFF. The National Volunteer Fire Council, which is the council for our volunteer professionals. That is the NVFC. The North American Fire Training Directors, the NAFTD. We have the National Fire Department Safety Officer Association, the FDSOA, International Society of Fire Service Instructors, the ISFSI, the American Society of Safety Engineers, that is the ASSE, International Fire Service Accreditation Conference, that is IFSAC. That is what we'll be testing under on the 14th. And the National Board on Fire Service Professional Qualifications, which is ProBoard. They also are an accrediting agency here in Washington State. Learning Objective 2. We're going to describe the responsibilities of the instructor as a safety role model. The instructor is a primary role model for safety and must take that role seriously. In addition to describing safety guidelines, instructors must demonstrate and reinforce these guidelines equally with students and staff. Following safety guidelines or plans has a significant effect on reducing injuries and fatalities in training at an emergency incident. Instructors must be empowered to plan, change, and present courses that follow safety requirements. Caution: if a policy is in place and you, as an instructor, do not follow its guidelines, you may be held liable for injuries to students. Not may, you will be held liable, and probably the only one named in the civil suit. Instructor as a safety role model. We as instructors must devote appropriate time to discussing the aspects of safety outside the classroom and in the classroom. Safety provisions and briefings need to be planned well before the activity starts and reflected during the training session through awareness to our students and practice. Describing applicable safety requirements or procedures to students in the following forms. Let's provide them the rules and guidelines in writing. Reading the written rules and guidelines aloud as the students read them silently. Having students sign a statement that say they have read and understood all safety rules and regulations. In some departments and organizations, this signature is mandatory before you can continue in the training. Let's create a training and safety plan for any high hazard drill or application and briefing all instructors and students on the plan before the training begins. We need to plan carefully for training scenarios, all training scenarios. Ensuring that appropriately trained personnel assist in supervising scenarios. Let's inspect and repair tools, equipment, props, and apparatus before starting those training sessions. We need to assign a safety officer to each training scenario based upon the prepared training and safety plan. Now, that could be the lead instructor that is carrying multiple roles, but it still needs to be assigned. Let's assign additional personnel, more than the minimum, for safety positions depending upon the scale of the training evolution and the severity of danger. Describing the proper safeguards and equipment used for preventing accidents, and describing possible hazards and explaining the necessary precautions. Briefing students on relevant techniques, procedures, tools, facility characteristics, and appropriate safety rules before starting the evolution. We're talking about increasing our awareness and preventing actions. And this is a little bit of a rediscussion, but we need to review emergency procedures. We need to talk about emergency evacuation plans and verbal or alarm alerts with the student before the evolution. Modeling and reinforcing safety policies and procedures by personally adhering to them. Let's watch for behaviors that contribute to unsafe conditions, such as improper attitude, complacency, or lack of knowledge or skill. When planning practical training evolutions, instructors must identify and eliminate potential hazards. We as instructors must also plan to address the necessary precautions to prevent injury while training. Train students to recognize job hazards and teach them how to control or eliminate these hazards. These precautions help minimize the level of risk and prevent injuries. When planning high hazard training evolutions, the instructor should appoint another qualified individual as safety officer for the training evolution. So when we're doing live fire training, the lead instructor should not assume the training officer, the safety officer role. It's too dangerous of a training day. We need another standalone safety officer to be appointed. And that safety officer needs to be familiar with the logistics involved in the evolution, including the purpose and scope of the training and what may happen at any given time. Fire and emergency services programs often train non-emergency services employees. Although these students may not be required to perform all aspects of the curriculum on their jobs, instructors must enforce all safety procedures as these employees participate in the course. Regardless whether all training procedures apply to these students, they must still follow safety guidelines. Here's a note. We need to establish and use training and safety plans during all types of emergency incidents and high hazard training evolutions. We also need to include the use of a personnel accountability system. In Mason County, predominantly, it's the Passport accountability system that we use. Learning objective 3, we need to identify ways that instructors plan for safe training. Training ground instruction requires thorough planning. These sections that follow discuss important actions regarding planning safe training. Even though verification of instructor skill levels ultimately falls on the instructor, level 2 and 3 levels, instructors should be honest with themselves about their own ability levels and knowledge. An instructor who is certified to a proficiency level in a skill may find that he or she needs to relearn the skill if it has not been actively used in some time. In addition, some skills change over time. When an instructor has the appropriate certifications but is not confident in his or her competence in teaching the skills needed for a class, that instructor needs to seek out courses to gain the current skills or recommend a better qualified instructor to teach the course. In contrast, an instructor may be capable of teaching the skills at an appropriate level, but may not have collected the appropriate certifications to teach a topic. In this case, an instructor should work with supervisors to update their certifications whenever possible. Training cannot continue without an available instructor who has the appropriate skills and qualifications. Instructors should be careful to work with their organization to take advantage of continuing education opportunities that will benefit their ability to offer timely, accurate, and safe training. Equipment evaluation and inspections ensure that class props and all other instructional technology tools are available and in working conditions before a class session begins. If inspections show that equipment is unsafe or damaged, the instructor should report this to the authority having jurisdiction. Depending on resources available, training session may be rescheduled, adjusted to exclude the type of equipment, or moved to another location with the specified equipment in functional repair. During entry-level recruit classes, some inspection, maintenance, and repair of facilities and props can be assigned to class members as a training activity. Care must be taken to not assign tasks that require certified or authorized personnel, such as evaluating the implications of beam alignments or apparent cracks in structural elements. Let's keep thorough records of all maintenance, repairs, inspections, and replacements. The records provide a basis for developing an accurate operating budget, justifying repairs or replacements, and assessing equipment's overall value. In all cases, maintenance and repairs beyond the capabilities of students or instructors need to be delegated to certified or authorized repair personnel. When we look at inspecting and repairing facilities and props, we lean on industry practice, the manufacturer's recommendations, and the local needs when looking at inspection time schedules. Inspecting and repairing facilities and props, records. We have to have great maintenance records, repair records, inspection records, and then replacement records also. Inspecting and repairing facilities and props. The records provide the basis for developing that accurate operating budget that we talked about earlier, justifying repairs or replacements, and assessing equipment's overall value to the organization. We as instructors need to be familiar and comfortable with prepared lesson plans. the training facility, any training props, and the skills and hazards involved in the evolution to be conducted. Students should be informed during the training briefing of hazards they will face as part of training. Instructors will need to modify the lesson plan to include appropriate safety instructions when we are training in a hazard-based scenario. Learning objective 4. Describe the information given by an instructor during a psychomotor skills demonstration. Skills demonstrations begin with giving the following information. We need an explanation of the skill, discussion of why it is important, how it relates to other skills, how many people are required to perform it, and when it should be performed. After this general overview, the instructor should perform the skill at normal speed, then perform it again slowly while explaining each step. Next, the instructor should encourage students to ask questions. The instructor should repeat the slow speed demonstration until students are able to verbalize the steps of the skill. At this point, students are ready to practice the skill themselves. Slow speed demonstration is the transition between the presentation step and the application step. We as instructors need to guide and coach students as they practice. Have students critique and coach each other as they practice in small groups, obviously always keeping it positive, or at least at minimum constructive. Once or twice during a practice session, instructors may need to demonstrate the entire skill. Instructors must show the skill steps correctly and in sequence. The end of the session is a good time to do this. Students should be encouraged to practice skills during rest breaks, during free time, and at the beginning of the next training session. When students perfect the skill, they are ready for evaluation. Planning, preparation, and practice are essential to successful skills demonstration. The instructor who does not appear proficient at a skill will lose credibility with students and waste valuable training time by having to repeat or correct skill steps. Learning objective 5. Identify the elements of evolution control. Practical training evolutions must be controlled regardless of their size and complexity. Controlling an evolution involves the following elements. Supervising. Our instructors actively critique individual students' activities to make sure they practice skills safely and correctly. Next is monitoring. Our instructors observe the overall progress of the evolution to make sure students work together to accomplish the learning objectives. Teaching. When appropriate, instructors present new or related information during the evolution, and then managing. Our instructors apply the elements of the National Incident Management System, Incident Command System, to control and coordinate the evolution to the same management and communication requirements as an actual emergency situation. The number of elements that must be maintained during a controlled evolution will require a relatively large number of instructors. A ratio of 3 to 7 students to 1 instructor is optimal in most hands-on training environments. In high-hazard training evolutions, the ratio may require more instructors or fewer students. For example, the NFPA 1403 standard, which is for live fire training, mandates a maximum student to instructor ratio of 5 to 1, maximum. Learning objective 6, we're going to explain a simple training evolution. Simple training evolutions share some training techniques in common with psychomotor skills training. The main difference is the number of students involved and the training location. Psychomotor skills training is often conducted in a classroom or lab, with the potential for a large number of students learning at the same time. Simple training evolutions involve a small number of students performing a single skill that requires only a few tasks. Training evolutions typically take place on a fireground or other outdoor learning environment regardless of their size or complexity. Examples of simple training evolutions: lifting and setting a ground ladder, using a portable fire extinguisher, lifting and moving patients, forcing entry through a door, taking and recording patients' vital signs, deploying and advancing an attack hose line, driving and parking a fire apparatus or ambulance. Simple training evolutions teams. Our instructors should inspect and be familiar with tools and equipment. Evolutions may involve small groups and require 1 or 2 instructors. Students repeat the evolution, rotating positions to experience and practice each part of the skill until they are able to perform the evolution without error. Okay, at the beginning of our evolutions, our simple training evolutions, we need to explain the purpose of the evolution, emphasize the safety requirements, demonstrate the evolution, and relating the evolution to the classroom lecture, monitoring students' performance as we go. Remember to use positive reinforcement when applicable, but really 99% of the time we are positive reinforcement as our #1 approach. Continuing simple training evolutions. These training evolutions should be performed as though students were responding to an actual emergency incident, including typical staffing levels and the appropriate PPE. All applicable policies and procedures must be followed, including the use of the National Incident Management System, along with the Incident Command System. Learning Objective 7, we're going to identify types of increased hazard exposure training. Examples of increased hazard exposure training are live fire exercises, hazardous materials, above and below grade rescue, evolutions that require use of power tools. All have increased hazard exposure to our students. Increased hazard exposure training is dangerous even under very controlled conditions found at permanent training facilities. NFPA Standard 1041 requires that a Level 2 instructor supervise both students and Level 1 instructors during this type of training. Our instructors must be prepared and qualified. They should learn the qualifications that state and municipalities require, and ensure qualifications are met before continuing the training. If an instructor has any doubts about his or her qualifications or experience, training should be postponed until the instructor has gained proper qualifications and becomes more knowledgeable about the standards and regulations that apply. Warning: an instructor can be held liable for injuries and fatalities on the fire ground. More so, an instructor can be held responsible, liable, accountable for any and all activity that occurs in the classroom, virtually, or on the fire training grounds. Okay, what makes live fire training important? Our entry-level personnel get to learn new skills, and our experienced personnel develop their existing skills. The decrease in actual firefighting incidents the increase of internal hazards in fires involving modern lightweight and/or synthetic materials, and the assignment of entry-level personnel to EMS duties have resulted in fewer opportunities for personnel to experience live fire situations. Live fire training evolutions may be the only experience some of our personnel ever receive. Okay, let's talk safety during live fire training evolutions. To ensure the highest level of safety, all live fire training evolutions must meet the requirements of NFPA 1403 standard on live fire training evolutions. This standard emphasizes the strict safety practices for structures selected for live fire evolutions. While this standard is not legally mandated in all jurisdictions, non-compliance with the standard has resulted in injuries and fatalities for which instructors were held criminally and civilly responsible. In November 2004, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention from the U.S. National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health issued Workplace Solutions document titled Preventing Deaths and Injuries to Firefighters During Live Fire Training in Acquired Structures that outlines precautions to take when engaging in live fire training. Any instructor leading live fire training should make every effort to prepare and instruct based upon the NFPA and CDC guidance. What are our factors of use for acquired structures? They're usually in deteriorating condition and may have been scheduled for demolition. Almost always that's the case. Environmental laws may prohibit the burning of a structure based on its location. In Washington State, there absolutely are many rules from the Clean Health Air Organization in Washington State that we have to comply with first before we can conduct live fire training. We may have been designated, or this acquired structure may have been designated as a historical landmark, which makes it ineligible for live fire burning. May have lightweight construction elements that cannot withstand fully involved fire conditions. After a structure is acquired, an instructor may be assigned to oversee live fire evolutions. When a jurisdiction intends to use an acquired structure for live fire training, safety protocols must always be followed. Let's refer to NFPA 1403's live fire evaluation sample checklist, that's in Annex B, for information on conducting safe, legal training at an acquired structure. Continuing on acquired structures. The building must undergo a complete and thorough inspection and will require permits. Not may, will. If the instructor is not qualified to perform this inspection, a trained inspector should be brought in to perform the task. The authority having jurisdiction must apply for and obtain all necessary permits to conduct live fire training evolutions. Acquired structures that are used for live fire training must meet the safety requirements of NFPA 1403, which may require that improvements are made to the structure before the training occurs. An instructor should consider the costs of making the acquired structure safe enough for the proposed type of training. Here's a warning. Any structure that cannot be made safe cannot be used for interior structural firefighting training, period. Let's talk low hazard evolutions in acquired structures. These include evaluation of building construction, ladder evolutions, search and rescue, forcible entry, external live fire, and exposure protection. Factors establishing limits of types of training in acquired structures. This includes total number of students, instructor to student ratio, instructor's qualifications, the student prerequisites, the safety considerations of the training, the equipment available for the training, and the location and access. Other issues to consider. Will we have extreme weather? What is the condition of the structure? The possibilities of the training. How much can we do? Permits and inspections. Notice and documentation, because a lot of times we have to give notice to everybody around acquired structures, not lots of times, every time. The fuel materials in the structure, and the water supply. Do we have enough water on property? Conduct training, especially live fire. Weather considerations, wind speed, wind direction, high humidity, temperature, and the time of day the training will occur. Structure considerations. What's the condition of our structure? We talked about that a little earlier. The location, the access to it, exposures. Do we have buildings or homes right next to it? And the surrounding area. What is our training? How is that going to impact the rest of the neighborhood? Acquired structures, once again, must comply with NFPA 1403, specifically the structures and facilities section of its Chapter 4. Before conducting live fire training, the structure must be inspected to determine whether repairs are necessary to comply with the standard. Environmental laws, for example, may prohibit the burning of a structure because of its location. The structure may also have been designated as a historical landmark. If live fire training is not possible, the structure may be suitable for forcible entry training, ladder evolutions, search and rescue operations, or a class on building construction. Let's talk permits and inspections. We have to have written permission from the rightful owner of the property in order to burn a structure. We must also apply for and receive the appropriate permit from the local jurisdiction. Having these permits on display is an important part of public relations, demonstrating to citizens that the Fire and Emergency Services Organization adheres to the same restrictions as the rest of the community. We need to distribute a notice, letter or brochure to each resident living within a reasonable distance of the structure, informing them of the date and time of the training event, a description of the training activity and its effect, such as street closures on the surrounding area. Plan the placement of hose lines and apparatus carefully and consider how they may least restrict access to the neighborhood. Notify the water department when hydrants are involved. When an acquired structure is located in an area with limited water flow, flush water mains so that the rust and sediment do not cause problems for pumping operations or surrounding households. Prepare water supply and flow analysis. Instructors must know the required fire flow for the instructor, including the safety margins. It is a good idea to video or photograph surrounding structures, vehicles, and grounds. Hold a briefing with all participants to explain the training evolution. Take all participants on a walkthrough inspection to familiarize them with the structure's layout and exits. Let's talk fuel materials on acquired structures. Misuse of fuels is a contributing factor in many live fire training incidents. Following the NFPA 1403 requirements regarding fuel will lessen the possibility that students or instructors will be injured. There may be additional requirements for fuel usage in the state's OSHA or WSHA regulations that the instructor should adhere to. Safety is always the primary concern during live fire training exercises. It is generally safe to use propane torches or fireplace lighters to ignite the fuel and then remove the ignition device from the structure once the fire has started. Fuel material requirements in an acquired structure. All fuels must have burning characteristics that are known and controllable. Never use unidentified materials such as debris found around or in a structure. Remove all such materials before training takes place. Never use pressure-treated materials or any materials containing pesticides or harmful chemicals. Use only enough fuel to create a fire of the desired size. Never use more than this amount. Control the structure's fuel load to prevent flashover or backdraft conditions. Never use flammable or combustible liquids, which are called accelerants, in live fire training at acquired structures. Assess all factors in the fire room that could affect the growth, development, and spread of the fire in order to predict the fire behavior. Remove all highly combustible materials from the structure, including carpets, floor coverings, foam mattresses, and furniture. Document and check against the materials and construction requirements allowed in a live fire training evolution per the NFPA 1403 standard. Document the dimensions of the fire room. Ensure that a safety officer supervises while a designated ignition officer ignites the fire. Water supply requirements for firefighting in rural and suburban areas are provided in NFPA 1142 and should be applied to fire attack during live fire training evolutions. There must be a reliable water source for the duration of any live fire evolution. In this sense, water supply operations during a live fire exercise represent the equivalent water supplies needed at actual fires. Many acquired structures are in locations that are non-convenient to hydrants or other water supply sources. So we're going to have to do a water shuttle, normally using a portable dump tank, large diameter hose deployment if needed. We may need to draft, or we may need to conduct relay pumping operations. Purpose-built structures. These are usually found at permanent training facilities. For us, North Bend, the Readiness Center in Kitsap County, Central Mason right now is finishing a purpose-built structure out in Greatview. Typically, these have temperature sensors. Fuel sources may be liquid propane gas, natural gas, or Class A materials such as untreated lumber or straw. All interior structural firefighting training evolutions must meet the requirements NFPA 1403. Safety requirements from NFPA 1403 that apply to acquired structures also apply to purpose-built structures with the following exceptions. These exceptions, we can have multiple fires in a purpose-built structure, and a single water supply can be used. Take extreme caution that complacency does not occur in terms of recognizing the potential for collapse of the building, the structural condition, the heat in the building, and the ability of fire to spread in ways we cannot predict. The instructor must combat a complacent attitude and reinforce the need for situational awareness. Exterior fire suppression training evolution simulations. This is for exterior and wildland fires. Low fire load fires. We do not want gigantic fires. Transportation fires. You'll see those. Flammable combustible liquid fires, and then you can see wildland fires. Depending on training location and type of fuel used, there may be environmental requirements that need to be met for these kind of fires in the training realm. Instructors should check with the authority having jurisdiction that enforces the federal environmental regulations. In addition, many exterior fires, such as those with exterior props or Class B materials, may be governed by requirements in, once again, NFPA 1403. Small prop fires. These are used to train entry-level students and industrial fire brigade members on how to use portable handheld extinguishers to control all classes of fire. Training evolutions usually take place outdoors in an area where spread of fire is limited or non-existent, as they involve small quantities of fuel. Instructors demonstrate the appropriate procedure based on the type of fuel and extinguisher, and students then repeat the procedure, practicing it until they are proficient. In all cases, a backup extinguishing system must be present, usually in the form of an experienced crew with a charged attack hose line. Let's talk medium to large prop fires. Normally in a permanent training prop that are contained in burn pits. North Bend is my best example. Typically fueled by Class B materials such as liquid propane gas, natural gas, or other flammable combustible liquids. At North Bend Fire Training Academy, you're going to use a mix of diesel and water. Valves located outside the pit, supervised by a fuel control officer, are used to turn off fuel fires. Designated ignition officer starts the fire with approved device. Let's talk some examples of medium to large props. We can have a vehicle fire prop, a dumpster fire prop, a shipboard prop, and an aircraft fire simulator. We can also have rail cars, propane tanks, mobile props specifically designed to simulate flammable liquid and gas fires using propane. Simulating fires in flammable combustible liquid, LPG, and natural gas storage, production, and pipeline facilities is usually restricted to purpose-built props in permanent training facilities. Required pipe fuel supplies, control valves, product and water containment diking, high-capacity water supplies, and water decontamination capabilities. Generally involve multiple company training. Wildland fires. Training fire personnel to control wildland and or wildland-urban interface fires can take the two approaches. One, it can be specialized training for organizations that are responsible only for protecting forest and wildland areas. Or two, general training for structural firefighters who may be responsible for limited areas of wildland or areas that include the wildland-urban interface. In some areas of North America, the training for both groups focuses on the extreme dangers that wildfires can possess or pose. In other areas, structural firefighters may only receive limited training involving off-road driving, pumping skills, fire tech, and exposure protection. Training evolutions vary depending on the skills required to meet the local dangers that wildfires create. The nature of wildland fires makes them unpredictable and highly hazardous. Training students on safety is even more of a concern during this type of training because a controlled burn can and will be affected by the weather, the wind direction, and many other factors beyond our control. The National Wildland Coordinating Group, the NWCG, provides national standards for wildland firefighting training. Increased hazard exposure training types. Examples: hazardous material technician skill exercises have an increased hazard. Emergency vehicle operations have an increased hazard. Vehicle and machinery extrications, increased hazard. Power tool and equipment operations, increased hazard. High-angle rescue operations, all of these have an increased hazard exposure while we train. Continuing on, confined space entry rescue operations have a significant increased hazard. Trench shoring and rescue operations, significant. Building collapse search and rescue operations, significant hazard exposure to our students. Training types with an increased hazard exposure: surface water, swift water, and dive rescue, ice rescues. Learning Objective 8. We're going to identify the types of legal liability for which instructors and/or organizations may be held accountable. Okay, let's jump into legal liability. A person or organization can be held liable for acts they take and actions they fail to take. Act of commission. This is a wrongful act resulting in harm, and the person or organization who commits such an act is responsible for correcting it. Now an act of omission. This is neglecting to take an action that could have prevented harm, and the person or organization who failed to act is responsible for the consequences. Okay, here are some of the acts that can give me significant legal liability. I can provide incorrect information or instruction, failing to instruct in a topic they are responsible for teaching, or teaching a topic that I am unqualified to teach. What can I do to reduce the potential of my legal liability? I need to be aware of expectations. I need to teach to the established standards, teaching only topics for which I meet all qualifications, and always doing everything I can to provide a safe learning environment. Instructors are expected to foresee, also known as predict, potential injuries that could happen during training events and prevent injuries while training personnel for appropriate performance on the job. Students are trained in a non-emergency environment for skills that will take place in an emergency environment and are learning how to perform high-hazard activities that they are initially not fully competent to perform. We need to foresee instructional problems and ensure that they can be appropriately performed and demonstrate the skills in a thorough step-by-step introduction and then properly supervise the practice of those skills. Our training should be realistic but always controlled. Instructors who fail to properly control hazards during training leave themselves and the training organization liable for any injuries that may result. Here's a note. Injuries that result from emergency scene situations have special legal defenses that do not apply to the training environment situations. Continuing with legal liability, training in fire and emergency services will always carry an element of risk. So even if the instructor takes every possible precaution, our students unfortunately may still be injured. However, if the instructor has done a good job of controlling risk, these injuries will likely be the result of unavoidable accidents or student misconduct, not of negligence. Planning questions on our legal liability. Can instructors be held liable for actions of students who irresponsibly act on their own? Can individuals be held personally liable for contributing to their own injuries and the injuries of others? And to what extent are employers liable for injuries caused by their employees? As we get into the instructor realm, these are all questions that we are asking and getting the answers for before we take on, especially a high hazard. Do I have insurance? Who is insuring me? Things like this, so that I know beforehand I've covered all my bases. Vicarious liability. Blame for actions of one can be placed on another. The liability placed on the employer for acts and omissions of employees during the normal course of employment. For instructors, this is the liability is placed on them for acts and omissions of students. In training, individuals are responsible for their own negligent actions that cause injury to themselves or others, if and only if it can be shown the instructor made every effort to prevent actions through proper training before actions were taken. Foreseeability. This is the legal concept that reasonable people should be able to foresee consequences of their actions and take reasonable precautions. Failure to take reasonable precautions could be considered negligent. For instructors, this means based on their knowledge of hazard risk analysis, they should be able to predict hazardous training conditions and take steps to reduce the risk of injury. If not, they may be liable for any resulting injuries. Foreseeability also applies to the risks that students face once they have left the training environment and perform their daily jobs. Instructors must foresee the risks students will face there and prepare them to properly handle that risk. Liability reduction. Generally speaking, the best way to reduce liability for any individual training scenario is to develop a training and safety plan, then follow it during training. If necessary, a safety or planning committee can help the instructor to develop the plan. Let's maintain written objectives and document each training session. Provide the students with written course syllabus so they can understand all requirements. Train all students how to safely operate equipment. Do not leave students unattended while they are practicing potentially dangerous skills. Do not exceed personal skill level when training students or working with other instructors. Do not ignore, shortcut, or exceed protocols or policies. Use as many ways as possible to ensure that students understand the intent and outcome of all directives or instructions, as well as the consequences for not following procedures. Let's not joke about serious situations or belittle the actions of others in any learning or service situation. Never disclose personal information, except to the proper authorities, about students, other personnel, or any victim or patient who require emergency services. Follow your organization's policy on disclosing information. These policies also apply to issues that have the potential to be litigated. Insurance companies are going to want a lot of information. We're only giving it if we have permission. Hospital personnel, legal representatives, news reporters, other persons who want information about ongoing litigation, only if we're authorized to give it. Let's maintain current certifications through credible refresher courses. I didn't know is never an acceptable defense. When in doubt, seek advice from a higher authority. Never attempt to make decisions that are beyond your personal knowledge or authority. And accurately document all issues of discrepancy, complaint, injury. This includes details on dates, times, conversations, suggested resolutions, and follow-up plans. Okay, we are just under an hour on this lecture. I'm ending it here on liability reduction, so you know how to get a hold of me. Keep up the good work, and I appreciate all your efforts.